Rockstar is one of the best known, highest acclaimed video game developers and publishers of all time, whose catalog ranged from many open world action titles, more linear third person games, but also open world driving games, one of which I will be taking a closer look at. I will also go over the main competitor in this video, the one that put serious pressure on the almost unanimously considered best publisher of all time, them fighting their way back to possibly win the crown again, and how both of them turn out in the end. We'll be analyzing the entire Midnight Club series, Need for Speed's most highly regarded period in time and its aftermath. This is how EA beat Rockstar at their own game, and almost embarrassed them doing so. This is Angel Studios, which were initially known for their early work in 3D animation, or for the Nintendo 64 port of Resident Evil 2 they did for Capcom, which many to this day consider to be one of the most miraculously put together console ports in history, as well as the Midtown Madness series for Microsoft, which served as the spiritual predecessor for the important franchise we're gonna look at in detail. After that they started making games for Rockstar, like the first and second Smuggler's Run, another open world driving game released around the same time which had you play as a smuggler delivering contraband to large, open off-road environments against other gangs in 5.0, and the much later Red Dead Revolver, which started as a partnership project between Capcom and Angel Studios, only for the former to drop the project entirely, hand it over to Rockstar after cancelling it so they can bring their vision of Red Dead Revolver to life, who then managed to turn the series into one of the most critically acclaimed open world IPs of all time over a decade later, which Capcom even later paid tribute to in the Resident Evil 2 remake via an Easter egg. That's at least what my headcanon tells me. I mean, come on, who doesn't see the resemblance? With Midnight Club, whose name they derived from the Japanese street racing club of the same name, Rockstar aimed to create an open-world street racing game capturing the 90s and early 2000s underground tuner era. You race around New York and London, which clearly aren't faithful interpretations of them because look how empty that fucking traffic is. You start out in a taxi and work your way up by completing races and unlock new cars as you normally expect. There's a bunch of different races you need to drive and beat in a race before you can meet the champion of the respective city. The blueprint for the series was present, but it's obvious that there was still a lot of that Midtown Madness DNA laying around. The driving physics were very different compared to the later releases, and some of the mechanics that would become a staple would only be introduced with Midnight Club 2. Traffic was almost non-existent, which is a complete 180 compared to the later games. The visuals were also super dated. Granted, it's a PlayStation 2 launch title, and many devs were just figuring out the console, but not too long did we get games like Ridge Racer 5 or SSX, where the devs were able to pull more out of the hardware in just a few months later. Midnight Club 2, however, is where things would get more interesting and ambitious. A lot got changed and improved upon in Midnight Club 2. 3 cities this time, not 2. LA, Paris and Tokyo, 2 of which the series would later revisit. The driving physics got overhauled and feel much faster and more hectic now. New mechanics like slipstream boosting, driving on 2 wheels, which would become staples of the series, got introduced here. Visually, the game got a substantial makeover. More details on the car models, that look more like real-life counterparts now than before. Road textures, buildings, destructible environments and so much more. A big part of the races is the shortcuts you discover, that can gain you a significant advantage if you memorize them and make use of them accordingly. Aside from Midnight Club 3 in LA, there would be no other open world game, at least to my knowledge, that took advantage of map knowledge to this extent until Burnout Paradise. And I hope in the future for open world games to be more than just a canvas to place waypoints and drive linear restricted races on. Midnight Club 2 had you often look at the map and figure out while racing what the best route is to take towards the next checkpoint, which is actually pretty difficult to multitask considering how hectic these races get. The other races you challenge aren't just relegated to text boxes this time and got full 3D models made for them that age terribly.
Think he's kidding, posing like that. Think he can race me in that car? Still, I must try to be nice, yo.
Which developer designed this abomination? You beat them in a series of races, win their cars and bikes, then move on until you face the champion to the city and then move on to the next city. And that's basically the entire career mode. Pretty bare bones for today's standards. The game was also relentless. The bots often knew the perfect routes and have insane reaction times and corner assessment. In terms of physics it feels much faster than the previous game. And new mechanics like weight transfer on bikes that helps you go around corners easier, wheeling for speed and controlling your car in the air were introduced here and continued further in the series. It's insane that the air control feature survived until GTA 5. Always interesting to see how far the routes really go. This game also featured a race creator, and where you could set checkpoints at different intersections to create your own route, which was really cool. Midnight Club 2 was a good improvement for the first game, but was still rough around the edges. You could feel that there was still a ton of untapped potential with this setting, and Rockstar San Diego still hasn't gone full throttle yet. As prolific as Rockstar were, it needed a certain amount of pressure from outside competition to truly go above and beyond from what they thought was acceptable. I believe the next installment wouldn't have gone the direction it did if it wasn't for their competitor. And before we look at how Rockstar completely transformed the series, we're gonna take a look at what happened in the meantime in those 2 to 3 years till then. Because there was one publisher willing to take the entire racing genre by storm and have everybody follow in their footsteps. So we're all familiar with EA, right? Gambling enthusiastic, single-player games are dead, EA, right? Well, there was a period in time where putting out bangers was actually a regularity for them. Hard to believe, I know. One of them involved in that process was Black Box Studios, rest in peace, who just wrapped up their development on 2002's Hot Pursuit 2 on the PlayStation 2, who decided to go after the current trends and soft reboot their long-running household racing series. Inspired by tuner coaches from the 90s and 2000s, that was brought more into the mainstream thanks to the Fast and Furious films, EA and Black Box delivered one of the biggest and most impactful games they ever released. Dropping the exotics, daytime and constant police chases, EA decided to dive into the underground, then return to the surface with a much bigger payoff they could have ever imagined. Underground was a complete culture reset for the entire racing genre. It was a smash hit and a fresh direction the Need for Speed franchise needed to bring it into pole position. The game was a widespan multi-platform release for PC, Xbox, PlayStation 2, GameCube, but also the Game Boy Advance, and also as an arcade by the big pachinko boss and Silent Hill gatekeeper Konami themselves. It sold above 6 million units by mid-2004, completely eviscerating Midnight Club's sales milestones, and even though the game had no open world by its own to compete with, at least not until a year later, it made that point basically irrelevant by beating its competition in pretty much every other category you can think of. Visuals, track design, licensed cars, licensed soundtracks, car customization, variety in events, story and cutscenes. It was the quintessential Fast and Furious video game experience if you ever looked for one. At the time at least, there was no better alternative to look for. And even though some of its shortcomings are starting to show with its age, it's still a very fun time capsule into some early 2000s nostalgia. And only a year later, what they built on top of was already a strong foundation to make sure that they not only can take the crown but also hold it for the long run. If you thought Black Box already peaked with their last offering, then you haven't seen nothing yet. New story, a huge diverse open world to discover, new race types, fine-tuning, overall more visual customization. Everything Underground 1 provided there was more of. The soundtrack was still full of bangers, graphically it looked amazing, and the open world you drove around in offered a bunch of different areas. The starting city in Bayview, the mountain area with tons of twists and turns best suited for outrun events or drifting, or the bottom industrial area with its off-roading sections. And if that isn't enough, there's Street X or the URL, Underground Racing League, where you compete in a variety of closed circuit tracks against other drivers. Aside from your usual hot hatches or Japanese imports, they've now also added a few muscle cars and SUVs, the latter of which I don't think ever had a big presence again since they were pretty unpopular. Regardless, despite it selling less than Underground 1, it was still a huge success, pushing around 11 million copies, which is still a very impressive milestone to hit. The two Underground games defined one of the biggest eras in racing game history, and would serve as the Kickstarter for other tuner-era racing games, like Juiced or Street Racing Syndicate. Now all of this must have thrown Rockstar completely off guard. The biggest competitor in this space, also in a 2-year time span, managed to put out some of the most innovative, content-rich and influential racing games of their time, absolutely shattered sales records and exploded in popularity. Rockstar knew they had to go back to the drawing board, but not only marginally improve upon the second game but completely overhauled it to deliver what would be a huge jump in scale, production value and quality that can stand on its own against its biggest rival, Authenticity to real-life tuner culture also had to play an important part, which led to Rockstar San Diego getting help from one of the biggest tuner magazines of its time. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition. There is no regular edition, it's its official subtitle. Believe me, I was curious too when I was a kid. Midnight Club 3 was almost unrecognizable from its predecessor, only sharing similarities in its car physics and the previous mechanics established from the second game. It also kept the same 3-city progression system from the last game, putting you into San Diego, the developer's backyard basically, Atlanta, and Detroit. Visually, it's a huge jump from the second game. The soundtrack got a major upgrade and includes a ton of new songs in it, completely triumphing over the numbers of tracks the Need for Speed series has while still keeping a quality selection. Also, the car list featured a staggering amount of over 80 vehicles, also including choppers, sports bikes, exotics, luxury sedans, and SUVs that were actually fun to drive. All of which are completely customizable and also being licensed real-world cars. The licensing also carries over to the customization aspect, allowing you to choose between many aftermarket parts for bumpers, spoilers, hoods, rims, decals, the usual. Also, you can change the design and letters on your number plates, changing colors features a full RGB slider, even the nitrous flames can be recolored. You can adjust ride height from front to back individually, choose between a variety of vinyls and so on. Dub Magazine acted as the creative consultant for the game. For Dan Houser, it was important that all aspects of modern American car culture are reflected in what's been happening in the streets. According to an IGN interview with developer Jay Panic, Dub predicted that the cars included in Midnight Club 3 would become popular in the scene 1 year later, and they got it right 9 out of 10 times. Also in that time frame, Rockstar released a remix version of Midnight Club 3, including the returning city of Tokyo from the second game, 24 new cars, 25 new songs and additional events. The game also got released on PlayStation Portable, which, for a game that already struggled hard on the PS2, is an impressive feat. Then I remembered that the game constantly runs at around 10 to 15 frames per second. To my knowledge, and believe me, I looked everywhere, there are no official sales figures that can be found for this game. All we know is that it apparently did well enough to greenlight a next-gen sequel for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, Midnight Club Los Angeles. But it would have taken a few years until that came around. For now we'll be staying with EA, who at the time were busy cooking what would be their flagship title's magnum opus, that would be inducted into the Racing Game Hall of Fame, if there ever was one. I feel like Most Wanted doesn't need a proper introduction. What it's done for the genre and its legacy is already firmly cemented and isn't forgotten by many even today. I think even people who are almost completely foreign to Need for Speeds or racing games as a whole can most likely tell you one great memory they had if they happened to play it, even for a little. From nighttime to daytime, out with the chrome spinners and colorful neons, in with the exotics and gritty atmosphere, out with the crunk and in with the rap rock. Instead of colorful streetlights, we're going dirty with industrial areas and 7th generation sepia piss filters. This is Most Wanted, the almost unanimously agreed magnum opus for the series. You arrive at a place called Rockport and get familiarized with the street racing scene over there. Soon you meet a group of racers called the Blacklist, and where you challenge Razor, who at the time is the lowest ranked on the Blacklist, being 15. While trying to beat him, your engine happens to break down, and since it's a pink slip, you lose your M3 to Razor. However, you feel like something fishy is going on and that your car might have been sabotaged. The RPD, the police department from Rockport, not Raccoon City, then arrests you but then lets you free due to lacking evidence. So what do? Mia hooks you up with one of 3 starter cars to choose from, and so you work your way up through the blacklist until you get to Racer again, beat his ass and gain your M3 back. There's a ton of great qualities to find within Most Wanted. The gritty art direction, the fast and fun driving physics, the variety of events, the progression of completing milestones to challenge every driver, and the amazing cop chases that ride the fine line between challenging enough but not downright unfair. The only real criticisms I could bring up is the reduced customization of the car list, with Nissan being completely absent in this game. The most defining aspect about Most Wanted, which is kind of in its subtitle, are the cop chasers. I remember my time of being thrown into some high level cop chases that took up to 30 or 40 minutes even, seriously doubting if I'm ever gonna escape, and it's a huge gamble. The milestones require you to complete certain challenges like accumulating a certain amount of cost to state or being in a pursuit for long enough. The more chaos you unleash, the higher your bounty also gets. However, if you end up busted, you'll receive an impound strike for your car, earn 3 and your car is gone. If that happens to all of your vehicles, well, it's game over. Most Wanted makes a case for being one of the best racers in video game history, and aside from the usual check and compatibility problems from running 2000s PC titles on modern hardware, it's amazing how well the entire experience holds up. It's truly a timeless classic. It went on to sell up to 60 million fucking copies, numbers unimaginable for racing games today. So what has happened since then? Midnight Club went for a break for another 3 years, revealing itself well into the next generation of consoles with their 4th installment. A lot has happened with the Need for Speed series since then. Just 1 year later, EA Black Box unleashed Carbon, a direct sequel to Most Wanted chronologically in story but not necessarily in style. It's a bit of a mix between Underground and Most Wanted, bringing back the nighttime, the more serious but still very cheesy storytelling, police chases are back, and also more individual customization including autoscoped, further new additions like crew members and races or the infamous canyon events. It was decent for the most part, but kind of a letdown after Most Wanted. Much better than what followed after, which was Pro Street and Undercover. Pro Street was actually a filler game due to EA wanting to annualize Black Box's working condition, product output, since Undercover was gonna be a more ambitious title that would take more than a year to develop. Pro Street was definitely unique at its time, venturing into close-track racing for the series and stunning visuals for its time, that also suffered under worse driving physics, pretty bad progression and performance on certain consoles, and overall wasn't the directions fans wanted the series to go into, even if I understand wanting to change things up and close-track festivals becoming more of a thing. Then followed Undercover, and holy shit was that a train wreck. It's in a similar vein of Most Wanted or Carbon, open city street racing with a more serious but still cheesy storyline behind it. However, it's all haphazardly put together. The driving physics absolutely suck, as do the visuals. The open world has no real use since you can start the next event with the press of a button, and its only saving grace again is the customization. But it's kinda like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake where all of the good things about it were carried over from the better, older installment and you'd be better off playing the previous game anyway. To summarize it, the entire experience feels super rushed. It's what happens when you put your best developer through the ringer by making them push yearly titles for multiple platforms, while they're working on their own original titles as well. Carbon onwards marked the downfall of Black Box, which should be more attributed to EA's mismanagement than their own competence. Cause the Skate series they gave us at least was still very good, and only now after too many requests are we getting the long awaited Skate 4 sequel. Rockstar used EA's mismanagement to their fullest extent and made a grand return with the Midnight Club series into the next generation, and delivered one final title to end the series on a high note. Midnight Club Los Angeles. As the title gives it away, instead of 3 smaller cities you now venture into a single one of the size of 3, that being Los Angeles. You play as an unnamed character, who's someone who at least remains unnamed in the main game.
What's your name, cutie?
My mama calls me Matthew, but you can call me anything you want.
Who's trying to make a name for himself in the LA street racing scene. You pick between 3 shitboxes, you already know how this works. You work your way up from there, earning reputation and money to unlock more events, customization and cars and so on. The driving physics change significantly from the dub edition, but still go after the super arcade, fast intense design philosophy behind the gameplay. Customization has a bunch of new additions to it that you usually never see in other games. Bumpers, spoilers, fronts and backlights and that one body kit per car you're already familiar with. Some unique things however are the rim and tire customization being highly detailed, a host of interior options like different steering wheels, inside neons, color and interior gauges and so on. Also the introduction to a full-on vinyl editor, but also many presets to choose between. The soundtrack was also great and absolutely packed with songs, spanning many different genres to choose from like rock, techno and drum and bass, hip-hop, west coast rap in particular and more. The game also had an extensive online mode, from various events and freemium to choose from. There was also the Rate My Ride feature, where people could upload their rides for others to give a star rating to. Usually it featured some of the ugliest modded cars imaginable. Critically the game was a success but didn't sell as well as Rockstar had hoped, leaving them to drop the ideas for a 5th installment and focus their efforts on Red Dead Redemption instead. Since then we haven't gotten another Midnight Club, and with how well GTA Online is doing and how much of a good substitute it can be, I don't think that's Rockstar intent for the foreseeable future. Need for Speed is still ongoing and was financially at least very triumphant. However, we can't forget Midnight Club's quality output after the second game. Dub Edition and LA are some of the best races out there, and easily beats anything after Most Wanted 2005, and what came before can be debated at least. Need for Speed went through a serious identity crisis for a while, going from pseudo-sim to online MMO, super arcade racer, then to their old ways before Underground before ultimately rebooting the series again and focusing on street racing and tuning. It's amazing that the series didn't just die down during that process, as the interest in racing games has also waned over the years then. Honestly, I'm indecisive. At least Midnight Club went out gracefully, but we're unsure about Need for Speed as it's still ongoing. The Underground vs Midnight Club battle was the only time Rockstar faced serious competition and had to revamp their ways of approach. They already had their own series covering the tuner era, only for the other big publisher to sweep everything with their first attempt, completely humbling the arguably greatest video game publisher of all time and saying, hey, step your fucking game up cause we're embarrassing you here. Which is something not just anyone can do to the goddamn creators of the GTA and Red Dead series. I know Saints Row exists, but was there ever a moment in where Rockstar saw the success of the Saints Row series and thought, holy crap, Saints Row 3 just sold 5 million units, we might be getting dethroned over here if we don't make the most sophisticated open world game of the 7th generation right now? Rockstar always seemed like a company to go above and beyond out of their own volition in most cases. Okay, that one sounded terrible, but I'ma leave it in there. Also, GTA Online is active still and has no counterpart to it other than 5M, for which you need GTA 5 for to begin with. And the recent Saints Row reboot is, well, you know how that turned out. Sadly, I don't think we will ever have a moment like this again. Any other title that at least takes some inspiration out of Rockstar's book fell flat on its face recently. It would be amazing to have modern day Rockstar with the current technology we have give the attempt at another Midnight Club game again. That will probably take a lot less resources and time than the other mega projects they've been putting out. I want to seriously thank everyone who made it to the end of this video. Putting this all together took me about 3 weeks to do, but it probably would have taken only half of that if I didn't have real stuff like HR to deal with. I'd seriously appreciate it if you left a rating, comment, or just share it around to have it more discovered by other people. Any type of engagement would help tremendously. My goal is to one day, just like the millions of others on this platform, to do this type of content full time. And even though I know I have a very long road ahead of me, I want to prove my worth on this website by putting something out that's at least on the quality standard of this, or improve upon it every single time I make one of those bigger videos. Even though I'm very keen on other people's feedback, I think it's very reasonable to say that this is at least an acceptable standard. I will try to keep my upload schedule, for the 5 people that care, to be more regular from now on. Occasional updates will be at my social media pages, but those pages will also be littered with other stupid thoughts, so beware. I have a virtual photography page on Instagram and ArtStation you can check out as well. Thanks for watching.